Some of the most common questions about songwriting are the hardest to answer because music can be so subjective. In this video, I answer 10 of those questions and try to give you some of the most practical advice I can. If you'd like me to make a video that goes into more depth about any of the topics I discuss here, please leave it in the comments. Question 1. Can you practice songwriting? Yes, the main goal of this channel is to show the world that songwriting is a practicable skill and intensely rewarding. There's common myths surrounding creativity that scare lots of people away before they even try. I personally hate that. I believe everyone can and should have a creative hobby because in my experience and what I observe in others, people with creative hobbies tend to live happier lives. But onto something more practical. Look at every one of your favorite artists. Is their first album their best? I don't mean is their first album your favorite, but is it their best? Most likely not. For every artist that I'm aware of, you can hear a clear progression from album to album where every aspect of their songs get better with time and experience. The lyrics become more interesting, the performances are more nuanced and have more depth, and the other songwriting elements like the chord progressions, the melodies, the structures, the instrumentation is more mature and cohesive. So yes, you can practice songwriting. The more you do it, the easier it will be, and the easier it is to keep doing it again and again and again. Question 2. How do I make my lyrics, melody, chord progressions, or whatever better? This is a difficult question to answer. First, define better. Better is pretty much always subjective, and getting better is the lifelong pursuit of every musician ever. But let's try and break this down. A punk rocker who loves that nasty I don't give a fuck attitude probably isn't going to find lyrics about falling in love particularly compelling. Equally, a 7-year-old girl who loves horses isn't going to want to hear a song about politics. So if you're asking yourself this type of question, you need to have an idea of what better might be. Most often, you can find better in some of your favorite artists. For me, there's loads of artists that I enjoy that have better lyrics than I do. So I listen to them, find inspiration in their work, and then workshop those ideas. Sometimes I come out with great ideas that I put into songs. Sometimes I come out with great ideas that never find a place in a song. And sometimes I can't come up with good ideas. But it's this process of practice that means that when I need lyrics, I can create something functional and useful to put in my music. The same applies to melodies. If you feel your melodies are not as good as Chester Bennington's, spend time learning and dissecting his melodies. Change them around and see what choices make or break the melody. Any patterns or preferences you find in his work, play with it and make it your own. Soon enough, you will start to intuit his approach to melody, but it's around this time that you'll start noticing that whilst your melodies are comparable to Chester Bennington's, Bon Jovi's melodies seem to be out of reach. So you repeat the process. And believe it or not, the same applies to chord progressions or energetic movements or whatever else you want to improve. So how do you make better music? The first step is to identify what you think is weak, then find several examples where this was done masterfully. Learn from them and recreate them in your own voice. Simple. Question 3. How do I make my song feel more emotional? This is a classic question. Most people's favorite songs make them feel something. So of course, we want our songs to make people feel things in the same way that our favorite songs make us feel things. There are 2 factors that go into this, the biggest and most important being the performance. If you listen to a recording, not even a song, just a recording of someone that is just about to start crying, you will feel their emotion. When you start listening to a singer who is living the emotion of their lyrics, you feel it. That's why good singers get so much more popular than good instrumentalists. Good singers can make everyone feel something, even when singing in another language. The second factor will be note choice. Usually, if you want to convey darker, more complicated emotions, aim for dissonances. For example, these 2 notes rub together. It kind of hurts to listen to, but once you resolve them, you've created emotional movement. However, a song about sunshine probably won't need as much in the melodic choices, so opt for melodies that sound like they're conveying the emotion that you want. Now try this out for yourself. Sing a 1-note melody that is totally loaded with emotion. Then write a melody that has the appropriate note choices for your desired emotion. But with this melody, make sure that the performance has very little emotion. Then put it together so you've got the highly emotional performance with the emotional melody. See which of the 3 feels most emotional. So to make your songs more emotional, lean into the emotion, and anything that doesn't feel aligned with that emotion should get thrown out. Question 4. Do I need to play an instrument? It really depends. Considering this channel is primarily focused on metal, most people here would have started with an instrument before getting into songwriting. And yes, the voice is an instrument. However, there are loads of electronic artists who cannot sing or play an instrument, yet still write compelling music. The most important factors with music really come down to how you can connect with people. Learning an instrument will be very useful for you as you can get a sense of how music works in a physical space in relation to that specific instrument. But is it necessary? Maybe not. In a similar way to music theory, for those of us that bother to learn it, it helps us communicate in the language of music and more easily connect the sounds we hear with the emotions that we want to trigger in our listener. Someone without any music theory training can still trigger those same emotions, and they may even use the exact same note or chord choices as someone with training would use. The only difference is that they've had to learn it through trial and error and by copying their favorite artists, as opposed to learning in a more formal way. But whichever person has more practical experience would get the best results fastest. So I guess my answer is no, it's not necessary, but it will be useful. Question 5, how do I start writing? Sounds simple, but just start. Do everything you can to not judge your efforts. If you're anything like me, your first attempts at writing music will suck, but stick with it. It's a skill like anything else. The more you delay getting started, the longer it will take you to get good. You didn't start your instrument with developed technique and lots of experience, so you can't expect your creativity to have developed without any practice. Just get started and let the shit be shit. Eventually, shit will become good and the good will become great. Also, you basically have unlimited music out there for inspiration, so learn what your favorite songs are doing and borrow their ideas. Question 6, is my song good enough? This is a really common question that has no accurate or easy answer, but I'll do my best. I believe that the main reason people ask if their song is good enough is because they don't know why, but it kind of feels off. If you're asking this question, you're hoping that another person can objectively tell you a yes or no answer, or ideally give you some clear feedback on what can be improved. But giving an objective answer is really hard for people to do. If I don't like the style of music that you've created, I'm probably going to say that the song isn't good, even though it's the best song that's ever existed in that genre. However, if by some strange turn of events I happen to be your mother, I'd probably say that it's my favorite song ever because I love you so much. Shout out to all the mothers out there. And other people you know will often give you false feedback in hopes not to offend you, or because they're jealous, or a million other reasons. Realistically, you need objective feedback, and this is a very hard thing to find. The best thing you can do is get some type of songwriting teacher, a person who has been through what you're going through, can help you see your weaker areas, and can give you exercises to improve your songwriting abilities. If you think I might be a suitable teacher for you, links are below. But you can answer this question yourself because mostly the question of if your song is good enough falls into 3 categories, and those categories are who you're comparing yourself to, your skills in performance and recording, and the actual content of the song. For point 1, who you're comparing yourself to, if you're sat there singing something like Wonderwall with your acoustic guitar and wondering why it doesn't sound like the latest grindcore release, you're comparing apples to oranges. Find something more similar to the song you've written and compare it more objectively. For point 2, with performance and recording skills, you have your home recorded grindcore song next to the latest high production grindcore, but your song sounds horrible. Once again, you're comparing apples to oranges. If this is the case, try re-recording the high production song that you're using as a comparison to your song. This way, the recording and performances, now both being done by you, should be pretty similar, so you can more easily compare your music to theirs. And the final reason, the actual content. Let's say you've written a melody. It's not the best melody ever, but it was difficult to write. You don't want to throw it out, so you leave it in place. You write the rest of the song and the melody sticks, even though you're not fully happy with it. Now that the song is done, you feel like the whole song sucks because you don't like this one melody. I find that this is most often the case of a fixed mindset. What you need to do is jam on it and play around. It could be as simple as shuffling a few notes before everything feels better, but it could be more complicated. Maybe you need to change a few chords, which leads to an updated melody, which leads to new lyrics, and then a new rhythm, and on and on. But the point is, if you realize that the song content itself might need to change, you need to be willing to approach this with flexibility. And if you're really stuck, throw that section out and try again. So is your song good enough? It's impossible to answer, but the more you write, the easier it is to know what works and what doesn't. If not, try and be objective or find someone that can guide you. Question 7, should I write a verse or chorus first? This is also a very similar question that comes up quite a bit, which is, should I start with an instrument, a melody, or a lyric first? Annoyingly, the answer is yes. Do whatever feels right. Everyone has their preferred method, you just need to find yours. As you write more and more songs, you will find that you have patterns and preferences as well as strengths and weaknesses that bubble up. For example, I have a preference for writing the guitars first, primarily because I'm a guitarist. Once I feel like I've got a foundation, I can start singing over the top. It seems to be the easiest way for me to approach songwriting, so I do it. But this also means that I have a weakness in starting writing from melodies or drums or lyrics simply because I have way less practice with it. Once you've got a few songs under your belt and you're feeling okay about the songwriting process, I think it's incredibly valuable to shake things up. If you always write lyrics first, try starting from something else and do the lyrics last. Or if you always write the chords first, start with a melody. Same for structural ideas. Instead of writing a chorus first and then filling out of the rest of the structure, write the song from start to finish as you intend it to be heard. Breaking any habit that develops will ensure that your songwriting skills are kept sharp because you're always giving yourself new creative restraints. It will also ensure that you don't write the same song over and over and over. So should you write a verse, chorus, lyric, melody, or chord progression first? Write a bunch of music and find out what works best for you. Question 8. How do I finish a song? Great question. The song is done when you think it's done. It's that simple. It's your music and you're in creative control. I was listening to the radio the other day and heard a song that was like 50 seconds long that I thought was an ad or some type of those like musical radio transitions. This means that I heard something and judged it not to be a song. But just because I made this judgment does not mean I'm right. After all, their song was being played on the radio. But one of the best attitudes I learned when I started songwriting was to lay out a structure really early on in the songwriting process. If I knew my song had to be 3 minutes long with 3 choruses, 2 verses, and a bridge, it becomes really easy to fill in the gap. If you think about that, you only really need 3 musical ideas. You put them together and then the song's done. But you also want to think about a song like a story. You want a beginning, you want a middle, and you want an end. And the way that the energy moves from start to finish is very important. Laying out the structure makes it really easy to see how your song fits with a typical story arc, where it builds and climaxes at the right point. The hidden advantage to choosing a structure early is it forces you to write the parts of your song in context of the song itself. For example, I think we can all relate to writing a musical idea, whether it's a melody, a chord progression, a riff, or something else, and whilst we know that it sounds cool, we don't know how it would fit with anything. So it just ends up being a musical idea floating alone in the ether. If you write your ideas and you know the function that they're supposed to have, it's much easier to connect the dots later on. Another attitude that I think is really helpful when you write is to identify what section the idea belongs to. Asking yourself things like, does this feel more like a verse or a chorus? How do we get here and where do we go from? All these type of questions are really going to help. So how do you finish a song? Practice writing ideas that are part of a whole rather than a standalone slice of music. Soon enough, you'll be churning out songs. Question 9. How often do you write songs? This is one of my favorite questions. However, I'm probably not the best person to ask. My attitude is the more you write, the better you'll get. I personally went and got a degree in songwriting, but I didn't feel I was actually qualified, nor did I feel like I was in control of my songwriting, until I chose to write 300 songs in 300 days. But I realized that writing 1 song a day isn't practical for most people. But it begs the question, what is practical? Is 1 song a week practical? Would you do that in 1 session or 7 smaller sessions over the week? If you were to stick to that, you'd write 52 songs a year, which is fantastic. But is it ideal? The reason why I like writing often and with short deadlines is it allows you to test things out again and again in different contexts. If you have to write 30 melodies over 30 backing tracks in 30 days, you're probably going to get more skill and experience than a person who has written 4 melodies in 4 contexts in the same time. You will also find that you start building habits for getting good results quickly, and you will also start to notice your weaknesses quickly and be able to turn those into strengths. I think it's important to look at your favorite artists and see what their release schedules are. For example, let's say your favorite 3 artists all release 10 songs each year. Logically, you conclude you need to write 10 songs a year. Great. That's a number that is much better than 0. However, you realize that each of these artists has been on this release schedule for 10 years, which means that you're at least 100 songs behind them in experience. So you include 10 more songs in your year, 10 to keep up with their schedule and 10 to catch up on experience, for a total of 20. But then you hear an interview and you realize that they wrote 20 songs for their latest album and only 10 made the cut. So you add another 10 songs onto your year because some songs are simply going to be better than others. So now you've got a total of 30 songs per year. I hope you're starting to see that the question of how often you should write scales with your desired outcome. If you want songwriting to be your profession, you need to catch up and quickly. However, if you're a hobbyist, or if your band is dividing the songwriting workload between the members, you might not need to go as hard as someone like me. But the skill of songwriting is invaluable for a musician, so my suggestion is that you spend at least a few intense months focusing on it at some point in your musical journey. And finally, question 10. Do I need to know music theory? Music theory is basically a system to communicate about music. Just like a scientist uses their own jargon that we meager musicians may not understand, music has its own language too. It's far easier to communicate different musical concepts and ideas when we can speak the language of music. But music is fundamentally supposed to be an auditory experience, so it's not necessary to use words to explain it. If you want to learn more about my thoughts on theory, check out this video, but it essentially boils down to what I said earlier. Theory is the language of the music. If you can speak the language of music, it's easy to turn your musical ideas into music, and as a result, you can more easily trigger the desired reaction in your listeners. So we covered a lot of ground in this video. If you've got any burning music questions that you can't get an easy answer on, please leave it below and I'll do my best to answer it. For now, check out my video on what most people don't understand about theory. It's a good insight into what I wish I knew about theory years ago. Catch you next time.